Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Grace Committed Chats, brought to you by Grace Committed Church here in Philadelphia. I am your host, Caleb Watt, here with not my co-host, but guest today. Oh, he's a guest. Pastor Doug. P-Doug, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Caleb. Thank you for inviting me on to the show today.
Yeah, because today's a little bit different. I guess every week we've been doing an interview of sorts where I just ask you questions, but today it is an interview because it's a little bit more personal. So, yeah.
Yikes.
Are you excited, P-Doug?
I don't know. Don't know what to expect.
I mean, you're the one that asked for it. So.
Hey, now.
Yeah, no surprises here. But yeah, anyways, I do think this is an interesting opportunity for me because I feel like, we've been talking so much, but like I don't know the entirety of your story, at least not laid out in a linear fashion, right? And it's always interesting getting a little bit more chronology and then like being able to dive into it, at least for me. So,
and actually, just to add, the reason why I kind of wanted to do this was I've heard from some people that they feel like they don't really fully know me that much. I mean, I share a lot of stories in my messages on Sundays, but seeing how it all fits together and just who I am, I realized that maybe I should share a little bit more about who I am.
Yeah, that's a good thought, P-Doug. I like that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so I don't know where you want to start with this, like how far back in the timeline, but like.
Well, I was born on March 1st, 1987.
That was a long time ago.
In Bryn Mawr Hospital, which is just.
Oh, you were born in Bryn Mawr?
Yeah, Bryn Mawr Hospital.
You're a local.
You didn't know I was a local? Do you even know me, Caleb Watt?
Wait, is that why you like the Burns? Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Maybe this is more for you because you didn't know who I am.
I know. I don't know my boss. But yeah, I guess like most of the stories that I feel like I know about you start from college, right? Because you've said many times that college is when you came to faith.
Yeah.
So maybe that's if we want to start there. Like,
yeah.
How did that look?
I can give it just a brief overview. I grew up in the Philly area. I went to school in Bucks County, which is sort of like northeast of the city. But yeah, I didn't grow up in a Christian family. So my entire life up till college and becoming a Christian was basically live mostly non-religious. Family's quasi-Catholic, which meant we celebrated Christmas and Easter, but we didn't go to church or anything. I never had a first communion or anything like that, right? Any of the normal like Catholic things. So it was more of just like a cultural identifier than an actual faith. And so yeah, mostly non-religious. But then I became a Christian in college. But just other random factoids. I was a band geek in high school. I played trombone. I had big curly hair, as some people at our church have discovered when they look back at my old Facebook pictures. Wait,
I'll pull an old Facebook picture and put it up right now in post.
Oh, yikes! Yeah. Very typical trombone player though, tall, like lanky, long curly hair. But did all that in high school, but then obviously, I met Jesus when I was in college.
So how did that happen? Right. What was that process like?
Yeah. So coming to college, one of the things that I felt that I needed to do in college was reestablish my identity. I had a pretty good high school experience, but I had a kind of a big fallout with friends. That's a whole other story for another day in a more private setting. But yeah, so coming to college, I was looking for a fresh start, and I thought I could just sort of be anyone I wanted to be, right? And actually, the person I wanted to be was more of like the crazy party animal, and so I decided I want to be like the life of every party, and that's what I strive for my freshman year. But I remember coming to the end of my freshman year and feeling kind of empty, doing the normal college party experiences. I joined a fraternity, like a social fraternity, did all these things, but I felt that, this new identity I was trying to establish was just not satisfying, right? I thought that this would be the answer to these fears I had coming out of high school, these fears of like needing to know who I was because of all that drama that happened. But I realized this wasn't satisfying either. And it was actually in the exact right moment where I was wrestling with sort of these existential thoughts that a friend on my freshman year like reached out to me. Like I was actually just sort of sharing with her. I was a little more vulnerable because I had just come from a party, and but obviously Jesus can make all things work for good, even brokenness like that. But I was more vulnerable, was sharing, but that friend was like with me and just spoke Jesus to me. And I think any other moment, I probably would have just dismissed it and just not thought about it, moved on. I mean, I did dismiss the moment. I kind of like got mad at my friend, said, "Stop telling me about Jesus. I don't want to hear that right now." But it, like, the thought latched onto my mind, and I couldn't escape it. Like, I couldn't shake the thought of Jesus after that. And so I went back to my friend and just started to ask more and more. And there was just something that really spoke about my friend's faith and the way that it made them so confident in their identity, confident in their future, just confidence in general, which is something I felt like I was lacking, because I felt like my whole life was fragile. And just seeing this confidence in her faith, confidence in her life, confidence in her future, it really spoke volumes to me. And so I just was so curious. And she lent me a copy of the book Mere Christianity.
Ooh, C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis, so great book. And yeah, it was reading through that book that I think Jesus really met me for the first time in a powerful way. I was reading about hope, because for me, hope was something that I always longed for, because I was trying to recreate an identity. I was always wanted to have something to look forward to. But that something was always something I had to create for myself. So I always had this feeling, this burden in my heart to create hope. And when I felt like I didn't have anything else to look forward to, that's when I would have these like existential crises. But reading that chapter, C.S. Lewis talks about how we all have this sort of feeling, this longing for hope in us, and that's because we are meant for another world. And that actually made the most sense of these feelings that I felt in my heart. This longing for something else, longing for a place to be home, right? And it's because God wrote hope into my heart, because I was made for another world. And it was really like one of those light bulb moments in my life, right? Like you see those on cartoons, like light bulb flashes. I literally felt like that. Like everything clicked and made sense in Jesus, and who he was and what was promised. And I just remember just like crying, like, wow, how could I have been so wrong my whole life? And I just remember getting down on my knees that night and just praying, like, Jesus, I want to follow you for the rest of my life.
Oh, that's quite powerful. Yeah. It reminds me of like in Ecclesiastes, right? The Lord has set eternity in man's heart, right? So how did that then continue into your time joining GCC? Right?
Yeah. So that was the summer sort of between my freshman and sophomore years. And that was a summer of a lot of just personal, let's just say, like, what's the word? Like cleansing of all this like brokenness, and trying to like let go of all these things I realized that were like bad in my life. But coming back to the college sophomore year, I knew I needed to find a church to go to. I knew I couldn't be like, well, I didn't know this. The person who was like reaching out to me told me this, like, you need to join a church. And the only church I really knew was GCC, because there was a few people who I knew from freshman year who went to GCC. And also they also sort of like when that summer, as I was wrestling with faith and coming to know Jesus, they also like invited me to come to GCC. And so I remember coming to my first service in Meyerson, September of 2006, and just sitting there and just thinking like, wow, this is a church that I want to stay at. Like, I just felt like something powerful in that room through the worship, the message. And it was so different than anything I experienced, because I grew up quasi-Catholic. So I had been to a few Catholic services because my mom's like extended family are Catholic and things like that. But there in that room, I realized there was something like different. Like, I felt the presence of God, and I'm like, this is where I want to be. And basically from that point forward, just went to GCC, went to Symphony after that, been in AMI. Like, I was like hooked in that moment, But yeah, it was that fall I started going to GCC, and that's where I started to really grow. I joined my first family group, met in the quad.
Wow.
On Penn's campus.
Back to the quad as a sophomore.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. The family group was meeting there, but, but since then, just God has really been working in my life through GCC, and then through Symphony, and now obviously back to GCC.
Yeah. Now back to GCC. So then how did your time at GCC then lead up to you receiving calling to ministry, right? And what did that look like? And Well, I guess we can just take it from there.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're going step by step. I guess.
No, it's good. It's good.
Yeah.
So becoming a Christian, and I mentioned that also that same summer I was starting to like let go of the things of part of me that I didn't really like anymore. So it was really just a deconstruction of self and taking on a new identity. And I was basically like a blank slate, like literally just blank slate coming into my sophomore year. Before that, I thought I wanted to go into finance, wanted to work, in New York, make lots of money, all that, right? That was my dream. But in that summer of just letting go of all these things, I recognized that I needed to change, and I felt like I don't think I should do that anymore. I don't think I should be pursuing finance anymore. I don't think that's right for me right now. And so I just was so like in this spot, like, well, then God, what do you have for me? And I remember just praying one night over in, Harrison House, the tower, one of the high-rise towers over on Penn's campus, just praying in my room. And I just told the Lord, whatever you have for me, I'm yours. So, like, use me. Like I said, I am yours. I am your like soldier, I think is what I prayed. God, so just like use me in however you want. And then I didn't feel a call specifically then, but I could feel myself wanting to give my life like fully to the Lord. But it was in my junior year when I started to serve in family group and things like that, where I started to realize, wow, I actually really enjoy ministry, right? And I remember the Lord sort of like tugging at my heart, being like, oh, maybe you should consider ministry. But I was like, I don't know. I'm not sure about that. Like the idea of like preaching terrified me. I was like didn't have a lot of confidence in myself. But then that like same week or so, that same like time frame, a few different people reached out to me or would randomly say to me, hey, like Doug, did you ever think about going into ministry? I was like, whoa. Like, why are you asking me that now? And so like these things are happening. I'm like, maybe God is calling me to this. And I actually reached out to Pastor Young at that time, shared with him. And received a lot of wisdom from him in regards to like preparing and thinking about the call. But I think I felt really strongly that this is what the Lord wanted from me as a junior there. Yeah,
as a junior. But then after college, you still worked in finance for a little bit, right? Yeah. Well, actually, this is a part of the timeline I'm not super clear on. Like, when did you start working, and like how did that involve Symphony? Right?
Yeah. Good question. So I mentioned Pastor Young gave me a lot of wisdom, and one of the pieces of wisdom he gave me was that I should consider working, like not in ministry, like in like the private sector, right? Coming out of college, for a number of years. One, because he thinks that's just good. He thinks that's just good wisdom, just so that you know yourself a little more, know the world a little more, versus going straight into ministry. And two, since my family's not Christian, my parents aren't Christian, and they're the ones that supported me through college. It would somebody be like a slap in the face to go straight into ministry, because that's not necessarily their expectations for me when they were supporting me through college. And so as a way to honor them, I decided I would sort of do the thing I sort of follow a similar career path that I talked with them before. Just show them I tried, because I think in their minds they wanted to see that I actually gave it a shot, to see that maybe I did enjoy it and that it is what I actually want to do with my life. And so I felt like, through Pastor Young's wisdom and just prayer, I was like, this is probably right. I probably should work for a number of years. But my original plan was to work in Philly. And I actually had this sort of like vision of sort of this like idea in my mind about like what ministry might look like in Philadelphia for me. And it was kind of a naive thing. I was like, I don't want to like work for a church. I want to start a group that bring churches together. And it's kind of, it's like a good thing, but it's sort of like naive to think that someone who's like 22 could do that. And so I actually remember sharing this to Pastor Barry, who was on staff at GCC at the time. This is before Symphony was planted. And he was like, yeah, that sounds good, but he's like, I don't know if that's like the best thing to start off with. I don't know. I think maybe you should really focus on like serving at a church and coming to like grow your ministry skills there first before trying to like do some sort of like start like a parachurch type of thing, right? And so I was like, that's very true. And so again, I kind of was it's like blank slate moment, I was like, then what do you have for me? And maybe this is Pastor Barry, just like 4D chess moment, but I was like, well, he's going to plant this church in Boston at the same time I'm graduating. Like, this actually seems like a really great opportunity for me to grow in these ministry skills, or being part of a church, seeing a church grow. while also working, like in the real world. Like I can learn what it means to serve at a church, and especially in a time when a church is very young and growing. And I said, yeah, actually, this seems like God is ordaining this to happen, right? He was planning at the exact same time I was graduating. There was no reason why I couldn't, right? I had no real strings to keep me from moving to Boston. And so I was like, yeah, I guess, God, I should go to Boston. And then also, another thing added to the mix was that I was dating Cindy at the time, my now wife, and she was from Boston, was planning on going back to Boston. So, God aligns all the factors.
I was about to ask, like, how did getting married factor into all this?
So all the streams of my life sort of converged in that moment. I don't want to assign any more weight to any of them. Let's just say the Lord worked through all those streams.
Yeah.
And so, I moved to Boston, though. And when I was applying for jobs, though, coming out of college, I only applied for Boston. And that could seem very limiting. Like, how can I be the one to stipulate to these companies I'm applying to that I only want to work in Boston? And so I actually applied to Accenture, consulting company. And that's a whole other story. That's for another time I can share. But I remember telling them, though, that, I really want to work in Boston, even though they were recruiting me for the Philly office. And they said, well, I'm not sure about that. Boston is a little more popular. Philly, unfortunately, is not as popular. So they want more people to go to Philly. But I think this is like God's providence. But they called me back 2 weeks later. Being, actually, we're actually able to get you a spot in the Boston office. And I remember just Lord, just I was I couldn't believe it. I was actually starting to get a little down. What if this happened? I'm gonna have to turn down this offer. I'm gonna have to look for a whole new job. This is gonna be difficult. But even before I graduated, I had a job now lined up in Boston, and it's yeah, God, you made a way. And so I moved to Boston with Pastor Barry and the rest of the team, and we planted Symphony. I was able to serve there while also working at Accenture and consulting. And I think it was very powerful, informative time for my life, and just as encouragement for those listening, if you ever get the chance to be part of a church plant, strongly encourage it. If the Lord is opening up those doors that it works, I would just say you should do it. It's really amazing to see God build his church, from the ground up in that way.
Yeah. So when you were in Boston at Symphony, at what point did you, were you always on staff, or was it at some point you transitioned into part-time ministry and then started seminary or whatever, and then what was that process like?
Well, being part of the church plant team, we were sort of call it lay staff, and that was generally what I was considered through the entire time that I was at Symphony before joining full-time staff. What that looked like was different depending on needs. In the first few years, it was actually a lot because there was no other staff except Pastor Barry. But eventually, Symphony started to hire additional staff members like Pastor Sean, who's now the head pastor at Remnant Westside, and Pastor David, who's now the lead pastor of Thrive Church in Taipei. And so as they came on board, I was, I didn't have to do as much from the ministry side because they were leading various ministries, but I was still very much involved from a lay staff perspective. So I served in lay staff for basically 6 years from the start of Symphony till when I went into full-time ministry. And through that time, I was also working though full-time. I was working at Accenture for the first 3 years in consulting. And then after that, I moved into a tech company called EMC and worked there for 3 years. And so you kept saying finance. I never actually worked in finance, just so you know, just to squash those rumors that Caleb Watt is trying to.
Hey, I just assumed Wharton grad,
Hey, the Lord freed me from the path of finance. But anyway, so I was working, but in between those two jobs, at the end of my time at Accenture and consulting, I started to travel a lot, and I was in this place where I was not really happy with myself. I felt like I was seeing a lot of old stuff come up because I was traveling on the road a lot of temptations to just go to the bar every night with coworkers and just sorts of, there's this temptation is to live my old life and no one would know because I'm in Texas or Seattle or, wherever. But I felt like God was telling me that I needed to get out of that because it wasn't good for me. And in that exact moment though, where I was realizing I need to get out, God opened up a new job, another job in Boston, right, at this company, EMC. And I remember just in my hotel room while I was traveling and then knowing that God was opening this door, I just started screaming God, why are you doing this? I'm rejecting you. Here I am out here thinking about how I could just start to turn away but you are opening a door for me. Like, why would you do that for me, Lord? It's like, how come you always, I was like, I remember saying, it's like, God, how come you always have to do so much work to like bring me back to yourself? Like, I just felt so undeserving. Like I was like, I felt so undeserving that I was like mad. I'm like, God, you did so much and I did like nothing. I just rejected you. But the Lord was like, no, like come back. And actually I felt like he was saying, you need to get ready for ministry, like full-time ministry now. And so when I came back, I was like, okay, God, this is a new season now. It's time to get more intentional in preparing myself for ministry. And so actually that's when I applied to Gordon Conwell and started taking classes on the side. Still worked full-time, but I started taking online classes, like 1 or 2 classes a semester while working, also doing like lay staff. And then 3 years after that, eventually moved into full-time ministry at Symphony, where I was at first the young adult pastor there. And then that's also when I went full-time into seminary as well.
Oh,
and also at the same time, my daughter Audrey was born. So a whole lot of transitions at once, right? You know, leaving job, doing full-time staff, you know, going back to school full-time, going to campus, going to classes, and also like a newborn daughter. It's great times.
Dang, that's a lot.
Well, that's what I say. If you're going to make transitions in life, you might as well stack them.
One big transition as opposed to many small ones.
Versus like, you know, it's better to go through pain just for a lot of pain shorter than to like endure through just somewhat pain for a longer period of time.
Wise words. So how did then, so you were at Gordon Conwell on staff, YA pastor at Symphony for how many years?
2016 to 2021. So
2021.
5 years.
5 years. And then right after that, that's when you came here.
Moved here.
So what was that call like, right? To go from a young adult pastor to like head pastor of a church.
Yeah. So good question. So in my whole like ministry thinking, right, as I was praying, as I had been praying over my calling, basically from the point of like college up until moving here actually to Philly, the one thing I kept thinking was that God was calling me to plant a church. That was the one thing I was kind of just assumed was the case, that God wanted me to plant a church. And actually like in praying about it with like Pastor Barry and you know, for a while we were kind of like circling around the possibility of like DC as where we might go to plant a church, as where I might be sent to plant a church. And that's what I would tell people like at seminary as well. Like, oh, what do you plan to do? Like, oh, I want to plant a church eventually. You know, I was reading through like all my essays from like seminary, like things where we talk about like our calling and things like that. It was all about like planting a church. And in 2020, like just sort of at the beginning of COVID, actually, like only a few months in, you know, Pastor Barry reached out to me because Pastor Young had talked to him about how, you know, he was wondering if I would consider moving to Philly to be part of a process of succession to take over GCC. And so Pastor Barry told me that Pastor Young was, you know, wanted to talk to me about that. But my initial thought was like, no, like that was like my first thought, like, no, this doesn't line up with what I feel like my calling is. And so I was like, yeah, I don't think so. And then as I was like just praying about it though, I just felt like the Lord was saying like, why do you think you want to why do you think you want to plant a church? And I realized that it was just always my assumption. I always assumed that's what I'm supposed to do. Cause that's also what I've always seen like in an AMI. When people like move on to becoming like, in their ministry, they eventually plant a church. That seemed to be the normal track, right? That I would see for others. And so I just assumed that's what you're supposed to do because we hadn't had any real like church succession happening yet because the AMI was still pretty young, right?
Yeah.
And so that was never even the realm of like possibility, you know, for me. And so I was like, yeah, maybe actually God didn't call me for church plant. Maybe this is just my own assumption. And I started to like, well, yeah. And as I was like praying through this, I felt like God saying to me, yeah, you should, I'm sending you to Philly actually. And actually even like the idea of DC is still something on my heart. But I realized what like God was saying to me was that I still want you to plant church, but it won't be you directly. So my hope actually is that one day GCC can plant a church in DC and that I get to like send a team there. And you know, I felt like God was even saying like actually Philly would be a better launching point for a DC plant than like Boston because a whole lot closer. So I'm like, oh yeah, maybe like all these things were converging. I just didn't see the full picture yet, right? And so I felt like I was saying, yeah, come down to GCC. Like this is where I'm sending you. And it took a long time to pray because I also want to make sure Cindy, my wife, was on board as well. I wanted her to feel a calling to it as well. And so she was praying through it, and she likewise felt the Lord saying, yeah, this is where our family was going. And so eventually we said, yeah, actually, Pastor Young, we think you want to come. So
wow, and now you're here.
yeah, right. It was about a year-long process. So that was like May or June of 2020. And then we moved down July 2021. And so basically a year of like praying and discerning, talking to Pastor Young, talking to Pastor Barry. Yeah.
And so then getting back to GCC, what was that transition back like for you? And also transition into, again, new role that you've never had before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so just to be frank, like the way the transition worked was nothing like I expected. The Lord has His own plans, right? Because the way that Pastor Young and I had kind of talked about it was that I would come in as like a site pastor for what was formerly UC, right? Because GCC used to be 2 sites, UC and Mainline. And so I'd be a site pastor for a year. And then after that would be sort of like a interim lead pastor at UC, but still be, one church, UC and Mainline. And then in the 3rd year, start to work on the transition of splitting the churches and becoming separate with me becoming lead pastor here. So it's supposed to be more of like a 3-year process, but it happened basically in just a little over 1 year. Mainly because I think, we recognize that things seem to be going well. Hopefully maybe that's, hopefully you would agree things are going well. I don't know, and those listening, but it seemed like things were going well. And also just the nature of coming out of COVID, we really need to focus heavily on the 2 sites, or now churches like Mainline and UC. They need a lot of care and attention because it's really like a rebuilding season coming out of COVID. Because originally the thought was that Pastor Young would preach at both, but it was going to be kind of hard to do that. And so one of the things that he said to me when we first moved here is actually, can you be prepared to preach every week? Which was the biggest surprise to me because I've never done that before, right? I'd always, in Symphony, I'd only preach maybe once a month or so. So it's oh, well, that's a big change. And then next thing you know, it's we moved up to being the interim lead pastor after 6 months. And then, basically a year later, we had our ordination and installation.
Oh, was that was this past year, right?
Yeah, in October. That was only a year and 2 or 3 months after I moved.
That felt like so long ago.
Has I been that much of a drag on you, Caleb?
Oh, no. It's just been that exciting,
It's exciting. You should move quickly, right?
That's why it feels like it was a long time ago. Wait.
No, it feels like a long time. It feels like
I'm a physicist. Time dilation. Something happened. It felt like a long time ago, but also very quick. So, wait, but that's quite the story. Wait, thank you for sharing.
Oh yeah.
I appreciate you connecting a lot of the dots. I guess my immediate first question, right, upon reflection, is you said a lot of how God's been preparing you, right, in this sort of in different ways, right, for I guess what you're doing now, right? So what are some of the big things that you've taken from each season, right, that currently help you as the lead pastor of GCC, right? From your experiences before you were Christian to working to being college or YA pastor, and even Symphony doing church a little bit differently than we do, as I understand it. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, I could see my growth through big seasons. I jokingly call them my own personal spiritual awakenings. Obviously, my first one being when I became a Christian. I shared about that, right? Reading Mere Christianity. About a little over a year after becoming a Christian, I went on my first mission trip to Uganda, and it was a very long trip. It was 5 weeks. And, it was very immersive. You're on the mission field 5 weeks. You are just thinking about Jesus nonstop. 24/7 for those 5 weeks. So it was very transformative because of just the nature of that, right? Mission trips are generally transformative because you're just thinking about Jesus all the time. But the fact that it's 5 weeks is just a very long time. And through that, though, I also came to see a lot of character issues in my life. And one of the themes that came out was I felt like I never actually dealt with my sin. I'd only just try to move on. I knew that Jesus was truth and I wanted to follow him, but I don't think I fully understood what it meant that I was forgiven. I think I just wanted to escape. In my mind, I was escaping my old life because I was dissatisfied, right? I shared about that in my story. A lot of dissatisfaction in my life, recognized I needed to let go of things in my past. I was not happy with who I was. I needed to be someone different. But when I came on a mission trip, I realized that there was some of this old stuff that was still in me. I'm like, wait, how come this stuff is still in me? I see it coming out in the way I was interacting with other team members, because you're with the same people, right? When you're with the same people for so long, you start to, things start to get, there's a little tension here or there.
Yeah.
And I could see some of these old things in me coming up. I'm like, wait, God, how come there's old stuff in me? I thought I had moved on from that. And I felt like the Lord was saying, well, you've tried to move on, but you actually haven't allowed me to free you from it. And what I learned through that was I actually hadn't learned what it meant to be a child of God and being like fully forgiven and loved. Like for me, I was a follower of Jesus. I followed him because I knew it was true. And I wanted to like follow him also because in moving forward, I was escaping, right? But I didn't know I didn't realize that like being a follower of Jesus meant a complete change in my whole identity. Not just on the outside, but in the inside as well. And I think in that moment, I learned really deeply what it meant to be forgiven, what it meant to be a child of God, known and loved by my Father. And that was very powerful for me and very transformative because it freed me from my past in a way that I hadn't been before. And so that was like my first great awakening, truly understanding like what it meant to be forgiven, right? I joke like that's when I truly learned justification, like once and for all forgiven, right? Not just in the moment, not just for like one sin, right? But for past, present, and even future sins. And that gave me freedom to know that I don't need to be perfect in the future because I'm already forgiven. Because I'm a child of God. I'm already forgiven and beloved by my Father in heaven. And so like all that like came together, and on that trip, and then also in the month after the trip, as I was like processing through that, I read through Romans very, very slowly. Caleb's loving this right now.
I love Romans, dude.
yeah. But also Psalm 139 as well. That was a very formative psalm for me in that time. But that was my first great awakening, and that's really what propelled me into thinking about ministry and all that kind of stuff after in my junior year. But then in that transition between my two jobs, I mentioned, right, 3 years in, I was wrestling with like falling back into my old ways. So again, I felt like a pull from my past again. And then the Lord opened up the door for me to get that new job so I didn't have to travel anymore. And I remember like praying and like God was saying to me, I'm teaching you what it means I am faithful. Because I heard this before. I mean, you read about it, you sing about it, we know it, right? You know in our minds, but I never experienced it in my life in such a tangible way that he was faithful to me as his child. And that was so powerful for me because my God is not faithful in an abstract sense. He's faithful in how he leads my life and directs my steps. And that was like so powerful for me to learn. And it meant that like I have a God who actually like literally like tangibly is with me, not just in the abstract. And yeah, that was a very powerful time for me. And I learned in that moment, like, yeah, like I can follow God like tangibly with my life. And I was also kind of like going through EG at the time, which is all about like following God, hearing his voice. And I'm like, yeah, like God is real. Like he's not, obviously we believe as Christians, but sometimes we just abstract it as if it's just like a thought, but he's real. Like he directs our steps. He leads us. He's involved in our lives. And I started to really be more in tune with how he wanted to lead my life from that point forward. And so that was when I also started to be more consciously prepare for ministry because I'm like, God, you're calling me now to follow you and to listen for your voice and to know how, and to know like, basically to let you lead my life now. And yeah, what I felt him say to me is like, it's time to get ready for ministry, be more intentional with it. And that made me ready when it was time to step out of my job to go into ministry. I now had this relationship with God. I knew he's faithful and I was able to recognize his voice and follow him. And so that was like my third great awakening. It was in that moment, like that time of like learning his faithfulness and learning that he's tangible, like he's involved in my life. He directs my steps and I can actually follow his voice in my life. Yeah.
So then how have you seen those lessons like play out as you're like serving as lead pastor now here at GCC?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, my identity, right? Whenever I feel like attacked by the enemy, I have to go back to my identity. I am a child of God, beloved. He is for me. Like I'm forgiven. My God is for me. I'm more than a conqueror, right? Through Christ. Nothing can separate me from his love. Like that's the base of my faith. And as a lead pastor, I can never move on from that. I have to stay there because otherwise I'll get so caught up in the circumstances, so get caught up in the ministry activities. But ministry should always flow from identity as a child of God. And like having that moment of learning that in a powerful way has given me that bedrock of like faith and identity that I need to be able to sustain my ministry. Obviously, I'm attacked all the time. Identity. I'm not perfect, right? We all have identity attacks, but I'm able to know that my identity is not as a lead pastor, right? My identity is a son of God, beloved and forgiven. And then the idea of like God being faithful and directs my steps, like I saw it in how he led me here. It was a long process of listening for his voice, following him, trusting him along the way. And that's how I decided I want to lead. I lead GCC is I want to lead not by what seems reasonable or rational. I want to lead by what I believe my God is telling me. Lead by his voice, right? Because we're called to walk by faith, not by sight. And it's so easy to do what seems easy or what seems to make sense or logical or practical. But our God is not logical in a worldly way. He's not practical in a worldly way. He operates in his kingdom mindset, right? In kingdom ways. And so I have my eyes on him, my ears to his voice to follow him. Otherwise, we will just be a church that does whatever we feel like is good in our own eyes. But I want GCC to be a church that is led by our shepherd, the true shepherd. I'm just an under shepherd, and I want to listen for his voice and follow him as I lead this church.
I like that. Stepping into your lead pastor role, what were some of like the challenges, right? In like I guess succeeding P. Young, right? Too, because P. Young is quite a legendary figure in a lot of ways, right? So what were some of like the challenges, and also like I suppose, right, not planning your own church, right? There are established traditions. There is an established way of doing things here, right? But you are also not, at least you haven't been afraid, it seems, right, to change things up and like implement what you feel is what you feel God is calling us to, essentially, right? So what have been some of the challenges with like doing that, right, and taking over as opposed to starting new, right?
Yeah. Well, to be real, like the fact that we were coming out of COVID made it a little bit easier because in many ways, most churches were in a state of rediscovery, rebuilding. And so it was a lot easier to implement new changes, as you said, because like all churches were, right? Everyone was sort of like figuring out this new normal, this new life that we were in, this new world. And so that was one thing I had kind of like going for me in that way. And even just the nature of GCC and the transitions that happened even before COVID, right? With Canvas being planted just before COVID, and then during COVID, a lot of people coming and going. When I came in, there was actually a lot of people who didn't really even know like Pastor Young that well. And so it was a little easier for me in that way as well. Like if I had come in at a time when like GCC was like pre-COVID, right? Or even pre-Canvas, that would have been a lot harder because it would have been a lot of like expectation of what I would be like as a lead pastor based on who they saw Pastor Young being. But the fact there's all these changes, right, made it, I think, easier for me to kind of come in and implement a vision that I felt like I had from the Lord. Obviously, I talked to Pastor Young like weekly, and so I'm not going rogue, right? I share with him all that I'm thinking, but he's giving me a lot of freedom to follow, to lead the church as I feel like God is leading me, and but he obviously offers his wisdom through it as well. And so it hasn't been challenging. I thought it'd be a lot more challenging before. I was worried. That was one of my biggest worries before. Like, how could I he said he's legendary, right? But I didn't realize that how different GCC would be coming out of COVID and just everything that happened. It's just a drastically like different church. And so I actually realized I didn't feel that pressure in the same way.
I see. Yeah. So then how would you describe the season that GCC is in now?
I think we're still in a season of figuring out who we are. I just said that for last year, but I think we still are. And I think I have to recognize that it'll take time because we're still like shaking out all these things, shaking out who we are post Canvas, shaking out who we are post COVID. And it's just really in a season of trying to figure out like who are we as a church? Who are like the people who are going to build this church together? Because I'm not going to build it. Like staff not going to build it. It takes all of us to build it. And I think we're in a season of really figuring out like who is like who's in to like build this church together. And I think my calling now is to keep casting like vision and make sure like people are buying into that. So there are people who are building this church. Because again, like I can't do it myself. Staff can't do it ourselves. We need to have the church buy into this. And so I think we're still in this sort of discovery and sort of rallying period. But I think also what the Lord has been speaking in my heart is that we need to be refreshed in the Lord. It's been 2 years. We've been done a lot. I think we made a lot of headway and just like reestablishing ourselves. But the thing the Lord has placed on my heart, especially for this upcoming fall, is that we need to have a fresh encounter. So my message, the title that I'm loosely working with right now is "Revive Us, O Lord." Hence the spiritual, the dynamics of
spiritual life.
Yeah, because I think we need a fresh revival, a fresh reorientation of our hearts toward Jesus, a reminder of what we're doing. We're building this church for Jesus. This is not just because we want to have a community of friends, not just because the church has always been around. We want to keep it running. We want to keep the lights on. No, like we want to be a church that is all about worshiping Jesus. And that's sort of the aim for this fall is like, let's revive our hearts before the Lord and just really experience like the winds of revival. And that's why I've really felt the Lord speaking in my heart as I pray is like, he wants to bring like, not necessarily revival and like, things that will make like YouTube and the news, but there's going to be like, I think he wants to bring a revival of our hearts this fall. And that's what I'm really hoping to see.
I guess my next question is like, how do you feel the congregation should view you as a lead pastor, right? Your role as lead pastor. And I say this because I feel like in the past we've had discussions about like, we don't like the celebrity model of the lead pastor is obviously incorrect, but like there's like a, I guess, what does you as shepherd for our congregation mean, right? And how should we view your role, right, in your position? Yeah.
Well, I'm still looking forward to the day that I can make it on Preachers and Sneakers. With my $30 Sperry's that I bought at DSW.
Love to see that.
But no, like seriously, I feel like for me as a lead pastor, the way I feel like my calling especially is to be one who really listens for the voice of the Lord for the sake of the flock, right? I am an under shepherd, right? I'm a shepherd, an under shepherd, because Jesus is the great shepherd. But I'm still like a shepherd, and that is how I really see my calling, is that I lead people because I follow my own shepherd, Jesus. I listen for his voice, right? It says in John 10, the sheep know his voice. And my hope is that the whole church will listen to his voice, but especially as a pastor, I want to hear the voice of God for this church, and even for the members as well, be listening for him and his guidance, his direction. And so as a shepherd, though, that means I care as well, right? When people are hurting, my hope is that they would let me know so I can like care for them and guide them and help them, right? When people are making decisions, that they can allow me to speak into their lives, right? To help shepherd them, right? I want to be able to shepherd people. And so that's really how I hope people would see me as like a shepherd, one who guards their souls, cares for them, and guides them, right? Because not that I necessarily know better, but my hope is that I can be someone who really listens for the voice of the Lord and leads people in that kind of way, and help lead people to where they can thrive, right? To the green pastures and still waters. So yeah, that's sort of how I would hope people see me, is like a shepherd. I mean, that's basically what pastor means, right? A shepherd.
Yeah. I'm contemplating. I'm like, what should I ask next?
What spicy questions?
Questions? Okay. Yeah. So how do you feel like you are still growing now, right? Because I think like a lot of times when I'm like talking to people who aren't in GCC, they're like, oh, who's your lead pastor? It's like, oh, this Pastor Doug guy, right? And they're like, well, we never heard of him. We just heard of like P. Young or like whatever. And then they're like, oh, he's kind of young, right? Like he's new to like lead pastorhood, right? Or ship. And like the other pastors are much older, like, he's a, whatever. And so I guess the question almost is like,
you called me young.
I called you because I usually call you old. Dude, you were in college in 2006. You know where I was in 2006?
All right. Come on now.
I'm kidding. But how do you see yourself still growing, right? In this season, right? How do you see God still maturing you, right?
Yeah. Well, honestly, I feel like the Lord has been doing a lot in my heart, even just this summer. I've been going through experiencing God again. It's like, I don't know, my 8th time or something. And every time it's very good. But this time has been very powerful for me, because I've been realizing that it's so easy for me to get caught up in fear. Like fear was not something I really wrestled with before. Before I was a lead pastor. Obviously I had like some small fears, but at the end of the day, when I was like a young adult pastor at Symphony, I didn't feel a burden as heavy. And so, because I knew that Pastor Barry, I trusted Pastor Barry and his leadership. And so I was able to find like comfort in that. But as like a lead pastor, I'm learning what it means to put my comfort into Jesus, right? Because I don't have like a person that I can just trust their leadership. And that's hard though, right? Because it's easier to put comfort in like a person than in Jesus in that kind of way. And I've had these fears that like there's this huge burden on my shoulders to carry this church. And especially because the church is in such a transitional period where coming out of Pastor Young leading, coming out of COVID, coming out of Canvas, right? All these streams of transition happening. And it feels really heavy to think about how am I supposed to like help this church get through this? And I feel that like immense weight. And that's led to like fears coming up at times where I'm like, am I doing a good job? I'm like, is this church ever going to grow? Like, how come like it feels like we're always sort of losing momentum rather than gaining momentum? Like some of these lies keep playing through my mind. And I've had to learn to like reject those lies and to speak like God's truth and comfort over my life and know that he's the one who will care for his church and build it. Like it's not all on me. He's the one who will build his church, right? Nothing can stand against his church, right? Not even like the gates of Hades, right, can stand against his church. And so I had to like speak that truth over my heart, over my mind, over my fears. And in this season, I've been learning that what I really need to do is worship. And actually, I've had this really revival of personal worship in my heart. Where at home, I'll just like worship this by myself because it orients my heart toward Jesus, reminds me of who he is. And it's been very good, actually. It's been so sweet this summer, just being able to like worship Jesus more. And this really has come out of like experiencing God. Because every day you kind of like do a lesson, and at the end of the lesson, you sort of like write what like you felt God was saying to you and what your takeaway is. And almost every week or almost every day, I felt like my takeaway was more intimacy, more worship. And I've been seeing the fruit of that now play out in my life. Just like more intimacy, more worship. And I just felt like a deeper sense of joy in my heart. I mean, the fears are still there, but I feel like I have more power to speak against them and also to find comfort and rest in the presence of God, in intimacy. With him. So that's where I feel like I'm growing right now, is growing in personal worship, growing in intimacy with Jesus. And it's hard for me to describe, but just so refreshing, honestly. And that's probably why I want to talk about revival, because I feel like I'm experiencing in my own heart like this summer, and my hope is that the whole church can like share in that this upcoming fall.
I like that answer, P-Doug. Thanks for sharing.
Oh, of course.
I appreciate that. Yeah, because it's like, I feel like again, going back to like the question of like how should the church view you, right? There's always a tendency to view the head pastor as like perfect, right? Like, oh my gosh, he's the leader, right? He's got it all figured out. That's why I'm going to him for the answers, right? But I think there's like something that's like very humanizing and comforting, right? To hear that, oh yeah, you still have to come before God in this way, right? And we're all together. We're just all pointing each other to Jesus in a different way, and you're given like this responsibility to do it, right?
Well, it's funny that you bring that up, Caleb, because a verse that someone shared with me yesterday, and that's been on my heart. I actually shared it with staff earlier. Touches on just that. It's from 1 Timothy 4. This is Paul writing to Timothy, encouraging him in his own leadership. And he says, "Do not neglect your gift, which was given you through prophecy when the body of elders laid their hands on you. Be diligent in these matters. Give yourself wholly to them so that everyone may see your progress." And, basically like, yeah, we're not perfect. But we set an example of what it means to keep moving forward, right? We set an example by showing that we're working through it, right? We're progressing, right? And I think that speaks loudly for anyone in ministry. If the church is able to see your own progress, because we're not called to be like static. We're not called to just be in a plateau, right? We're not called to hit some perfect status either, right? We're supposed to be growing, and that actually sets a powerful example when the church can see their leaders, see their pastors growing as well.
I concur. Well, P-Doug, we are coming up against the end of our time. And since this interview was a little bit sprung on me, I didn't have time to prepare necessarily a fun round of questions.
Lightning rounds.
Lightning round. I don't have that, but I do have.
What is the worst piece of advice you ever heard?
Yeah, what is the worst piece of advice you ever heard? And the best piece of advice you ever heard? There it is. You gave me the questions themselves.
Oh, no. I've heard lots of bad advice. Let me just open up TikTok.
Oh. Okay.
But put everything on
There's-
GameStop. There we go.
GameStop, Wall Street Bets, finance bro here, right? Never worked in finance, but still a finance bro at heart.
Yeah.
What was it you said? You can't take the Wharton out of boy.
You can take the boy out of Wharton, but you can't take the Wharton out of the boy.
There is, but I guess my one fun question, but not really that much fun question, but is still contemplative, is like, what is like a verse that has like really spoken to you that's almost like a life verse? I don't know if you have a life verse, because I know some people don't believe in that, but like, what's a very impactful verse that has spoken to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this verse has been on my heart for a number of months now. Let me pull it up. It's from Psalm 126. I feel like I shared it a lot in the church, so people aren't that surprised. Anyway, when the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dreamed. Our mouths were filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy. Then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we are filled with joy. Restore our fortunes, Lord, like streams in the Negev. Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them. And the reason it's been my heart is because like this first couple of verses talks about like how God restores the fortunes of his people, right? Fill their hearts with joy, their mouths with laughter. But then it mentions though that, it took tears. Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. And I think that's just what I've been really resting on, is that God calls us to faithfully keep coming to him even when it's hard. Even when we're like, sometimes it feels like we're sowing with tears. Just saying, Lord, why? Like, how long, Lord? Why not now? And I feel like that's a season I'm in where I'm just saying, like, Lord, I'm just sowing in tears. I just want to keep coming back to you because I know you're true. I know you're good and you're faithful. I know that you will build your church. And so I will trust in you. And that even if I may be sowing with tears now, I will reap with songs of joy. And that's what's giving me hope in this season, is that I'm longing for those days where we get to like reap with songs of joy.
I see. Yeah, they're much more reflective and contemplative than fun.
I find it fun.
Yeah, it is fun. It is fun. What's your So an actual fun question that doesn't need an explanation, unless you want to explain. What's your favorite book of the Bible?
That's very like circumstantial.
Yeah,
but I would have to say, on the whole, it'd probably be Psalms.
Psalms. You're a Psalms type of guy.
Yeah,
I would have guessed Psalms too.
Yeah. But Genesis is up there, but maybe because I've read it so much.
Genesis?
Because every time I've said to myself, I want to read the whole Bible. So if I read Genesis more than any other book of the Bible, because of all the times I told myself, I'm going to read the whole Bible, and I start Genesis, and then like a few months later, oh man, all right, read Genesis again. Let's start again.
Start over, run it back.
Yeah.
Right. But anyways, Pastor Doug, thank you for sharing some of your story with us today. And thank you for your time.
Of course.
Yeah, very appreciative for you, P.
Aw.
Doug, Father Douglas, keeping watch over my soul and the rest of our congregation's souls. I hope I know I say this in jest a lot, right? Which I haven't said a lot on the podcast, but I say this a lot, like person to person. But like I genuinely do hope that we are not making your job hard, and so you're able to do it without grumbling.
No grumbling.
Yeah, no grumbling, and we appreciate you a lot.
Oh, thank you.
But yes, you have been listening to Grace Covenant Chats, brought to you by Grace Covenant Church here in Philadelphia. Join us on Sundays at Not Meyerson. Check our website and Instagram to see where we're meeting this summer as we finish up Daniel and go into the fall. And if you're new here, you can go check us out at philly.gracecovenant.net, and we will see you next time.